So hello, lovely people. Good morning, good evening, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. As you probably know, I am Sarah, as it's on my YouTube that I'm posting this. The reason that I've got this beautiful lady on screen is last week I kind of posted a post about my own menstrual cycle, about what it was doing to me physically, mentally, and I got so many feedbacks and so much good conversation come out of it. I had no idea I felt so passionately about it. And one of those conversations was with the lovely Julie, who is here. So it's our hope today to kind of educate you, inspire you to get to know your bodies a little bit more. But before we do that, Julie, could you just introduce yourself, tell the people who you are and how this kind of chat has come about?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to open this space, open this conversation. I think it's so important, so really appreciate it. So I'm Julie, I'm originally Brazilian. I'm also a yoga instructor. I teach Hatha and Ashtanga Vinyasa yoga. And before my yoga life, so to speak, I was a student at University of Cambridge. And essentially I, at the time, researched a lot of women's studies, sociology, and economics. And essentially my yoga practice started to fill in the gaps that I couldn't really find in academia. So my practice is really tailored around embodying yourself, becoming more free, accepting yourself, so that with the awareness of the cultural barriers and the macro level, oppression that you might have to overcome to find that freedom in your body, in yourself. So obviously as a woman, working with women is something very important to me, very special to me. So that's where I try to take all of my experiences to give to the people I meet.
Perfect. So we're going to use all of that knowledge and just kind of have this open conversation in the hope that some of you take a little bit of inspiration and knowledge from it. So here it is.
So starting off, because I know, especially like you say, yoga and the benefits of actually getting to know ourselves. I honestly believe my whole femininity actually come from the yoga practice. And before that, I wasn't actually very connected with what was happening within me, and what kind of effects the hormones were having, especially just different days and different days in the cycle, basically. So what would you say is like the main benefits of understanding our cycles?
I would say you've identified the main point, which is every single day of the month, we are going through a different part of the cycle, i.e. a different part of this very complex dance of hormones surrounding our body, making all of these processes real for us. And unfortunately, what a lot of people do is they expect that their experience of the month will be very linear. So they might beat themselves a bit into being more productive and blame themselves when they're not, instead of understanding that you have different moments where you're going to feel different things. And if you can understand how your cycle is for you, then you can get your hormones to work into your strengths instead of beating them into submission when they're not at this expectation of yours.
It's good. Even with me as well, I think being aware of what it does to us mentally is a big factor within it. And I don't think we get taught this in schools. Now, I know you have some resources there that will kind of help with this. So would you like to share them?
I would love to. I got very lucky that I managed to find a few books a few years ago that changed my life completely. The first one is called Taking Control of Your Fertility, and you can find it on Amazon, quite cheap. And essentially this book presents the importance of tracking your cycle, which you can do with a lot of apps, but this presents the old school way of doing it, as well as all of the knowledge about how to do this safely and why that matters and how you can build that relationship with your body. And I would say a guide for any woman is Women's Body, Women's Wisdom. And it's a complete anthology of all of the processes that your body could go through, and it links them to social, economic, and cultural contexts that might have created, a cultural trauma in your body or a barrier in your body you can overcome, and it links it to yoga, spirituality, and the importance of a holistic lifestyle in having vibrant health.
So that's like the Bible for us, right?
I cannot stress it enough. You don't have to read this whole thing in one go.
Of course.
You can flick through chapters that you like, and it really gives you, this is all the chapters, by the way, it gives you everything broken down from emotional layers that you might experience to understanding each part of your physical anatomy, to understanding your cycle, your hormones, your first period, entering menopause, all of these processes that are just otherwise completely invisible in the female experience, so to speak, of society.
This is the next thing I want to touch on, is the invisibleness of it. And where do you think we can go in terms, for me, it is about education. And I feel like there is such a lack of it, especially in these teenage years when we're coming kind of into our puberty and we've got all these raging hormones, and we are basically just taught the physicality of how to deal with it. Okay, you need to wear this, you need to do this, it'll last for 5 days, and your whole cycle is for 28. There you go and get done. And I think it really is a closed door. And I think we're never actually taught how to feel within, right? We're pretty suppressed.
It's very true. It's very true that sex education is very limited in that sense. It's actually an extension of gynecology, because a lot of gynecologists nowadays are men, which is fine. But you notice an interesting shift when they started entering gynecological medicine, which used to be traditionally women for women only. And they started just reducing all of the female experience to just, here are some days of the month, here's some numbers, here's some hormone levels. Whereas the wisdom of having that embodied experience, which unfortunately, unless a man hears about from a woman, cannot teach, cannot explain to other women because he himself does not embody that, kind of got lost. And that is reflected in sex education. We do reduce it to 5 days of the month, put this in your underwear, forget about it, don't talk about it, hide it. And the result of that is that women might feel ashamed about it, they might feel disconnected about it, and you really miss out on the experience of getting to know your body in a completely different way, and to tapping into the wisdom that your body might be providing to you. If that makes any sense.
No, for sure. It's this is where I think, especially as women, we are so powerful and we can feel so much, yet we're never taught how to do it. And I honestly believe, even in my teens and growing up in my early 20s, I've suffered quite a lot from anxiety, some kind of mental, not disorders, I wouldn't say disorders, but just some hard times mentally, right? And now when I think back and I look at that, I think, man, even now I'm more aware of my cycle, where I'm at, and these kind of phases that come through. Now I understand why on some days I feel like I can't get off the couch. Whereas before, I'm like, okay, I'm ovulating now. When I'm ovulating, I am a world's biggest bitch. I'm sorry for swearing, but I am. And but back in the day, I used to think that there was something wrong with me, right? I used to think, man, what if I actually really do have depression? Because I had no idea of the effects of the hormones within me. And the fact that there's so many people who could be sitting at home thinking that actually there is something wrong and they might have to go into different kind of medications without actually truly understanding this inner world.
It's true. I think a lot of women beat themselves up for not fully understanding the just really complex interplay of hormones going on in their body. And that's really sad. And I agree with you that it's very difficult when, you know, you're sitting on the couch and you're feeling your absolute worst. And then instead of being able to appreciate that and say, okay, this will pass, it's this moment in my cycle, it's when I'm ovulating, or in my case, when I'm PMSing, I'm a nightmare, and that's fine. Like, don't have to come near me. In fact, I'd prefer you didn't. I need my space. But instead of like having that moment to say, okay, this is my downtime, I've prepared for it in advance because I know this time is coming. So I'm not scheduling too much work. I'm not scheduling too many appointments. Imagine you just sit there beating yourself up saying, I'm a failure, I'm horrible, I'm worthless, why can't I be normal? And it's very easy to enter this self-hating cycle. Whereas when you understand that actually, you know, if you think about it, the moon changes, you have the new moon, which is completely covered, you have the full moon, which is really bright and shining. Our bodies kind of are very similar in the sense that throughout each part of the month, you're going to just be going through a different phase. So if you chart your cycle, which you're doing, which is great, I'd love to hear your experience about it. You can prepare for each one and you can say, I'm more introspective now. I'm here on my couch, I'm ovulating. Let me just take a moment to see how I'm really feeling, because maybe there's something in there I need to work through. Maybe there's a message. Maybe there's a recurring theme every ovulation that is signaling to me, this is something I need to heal, right? This is something that's affecting me. So I would love to hear your experience about tracking, because you told me about it and it sounds really exciting.
Yeah, this is the biggest thing for me, because the only time I've ever been aware of ovulation, even before maybe like 2 years ago, would be if someone's trying for a baby. Best period would be while you're ovulating. I'm like, okay, this is all I know. And for me, just to see that at that stage of the month, that's when I am super frustrated. And like you say, it highlights stuff to me. So this is the point where I get pretty down. I'm like, why am I doing everything that I'm doing? I'm not good enough. I'm not strong enough. I feel fat. I hate to say it. I know I'm not. Like, I normally don't have body issues. But now that I can actually say, okay, this is the time to relax and not run away with it, whereas before I wouldn't, you know? And like you say, it's kind of fitting into my work cycle. And the way that my yoga comes into it as well is then my practice becomes more of a honing in, this grounding sensation and this nurturing, rather than forcing myself out there, forcing myself to feel something different. I can embrace what I'm feeling, not kind of dwell into it, but just lean into that little bit of uncomfortable and be like, it's actually okay to be here for a second. It's actually a normal part of what's happening, whatever needs to happen internally.
It's a really life-changing perspective, isn't it? And I feel like what you said is really important for two main reasons. The first one is, you know, you really learn how the way you think about something affects the entire experience of it. So in yoga, we talk a lot about the importance of our thoughts and how our thoughts can become a material reality. I think this is a really great example. If you're menstruating and you're like, oh, I'm ovulating, and you don't know you're ovulating, but you're like, oh my God, I'm this awful, worthless, you know, fat human being, even though it's obviously not true. And maybe you don't even think that yourself. In that moment, your body internalizes that, and that can affect your self-esteem in the long run. And I think feelings of shame, especially around menstruation, is something a lot of girls and women feel. It's this dirty secret. They don't talk about it. You know, sanitary products might reflect that, because you don't even look, you just throw it in the bin. You don't have a relationship with something that happens to you for, you know, a quarter of your month, for a big part of your life. And then eventually the transition out of that is another life stage you need to negotiate. So that just makes it more complicated. And then the second really important thing about that is, if this is something that affects us for all of our life, then how can we really claim to be empowered if we don't have a good relationship with our body? Right? And I don't think this is a formulaic prescription. I think it's highly individualized. But I feel like when you start that conversation, at the very least, you start questioning yourself and what you believe, then that's when you can really decide, okay, maybe this isn't something I'm particularly connected with. Maybe this is something I'm really connected with. But if so, why? You know? And you just change your entire experience of the world.
Yeah. And it is just, again, this honing in on who you are and what you do. And I love what you say about the whole, we've been shamed to it. And this is what gets me really angry now, is the fact that I didn't see it. Like, I grew up in the UK. I thought that, yeah, it was something dirty and to be kind of brushed aside because it just happens, you know, when there is so much magic to hone in on, especially with getting to know yourself and to embrace the femininity. And that's something that I have struggled with a lot, as I was telling you before. And I think if there is more open conversations around this, especially in the years where we are more susceptible, where we are more vulnerable, then I think if we just start empowering these teenagers, just think of the women that we can have in the world, right?
Absolutely. I imagine if women were taught to love every part of their bodies instead of feeling ashamed. We have a long list of things to feel ashamed about. You know, it's the way you look, it's the way you this, it's the way that, how you dress, what you look like. I can't even. The list is just so long. But a woman's life, for the most part, will revolve around her cycle, her mood, her health. You know, when you go to the doctor, the first thing you check is, you know, kind of, how's your cycle? Do you have a regular cycle? Is it irregular? Is it very heavy? Is it not coming? Is it late? These are like the first questions any doctor will ask you, because that is the foundation of your health. And unfortunately, if we have to keep this invisible, then we're only allowing half the world to express its truth. Our bodies, like even our bodies even affect how we experience time. I'm sure most people experience time as like a linear thing, which it is. Time can only go forward, it can't go backward. But we also experience time as like very cyclical. The month always comes back to zero. And this is something I think a lot of people who don't menstruate might not be aware of, right? And it's not that one is superior or not, but it's both halves of the reality. You know, time is both cyclical and time is both linear. The world is both masculine and both feminine. We don't have to erase the other half. We have to bring it forward. I really believe that. This should not be a radical conversation. This should be a normal conversation.
Yeah, this should be just happening in everyday lives, and it doesn't. Another thing that was coming out in this debate when I post it all on Instagram is I want to know your views actually on contraceptives, especially the contraceptives like the pill, the implant, the injections, one that does give you hormones. And what are your views on using them, not using them, and how they make you feel?
I think that's a great question, and I'm so glad you asked that. I think first and foremost, it's an extremely personal choice. If this is something that you're comfortable with, by all means, go for it. That said, I do feel that it is not something that people have really critically evaluated as much as they should, in the sense that when we talk about hormones and we talk about a more invasive type of contraception, we are indirectly placing the burden of reproductive health on women. And I'm not talking about women who take it for things like skin or mental health or endometriosis. I'm talking about purely reproductive reasons. And if you know, the reason I say this, because I once went to get a prescription packet myself for the pills I used to take. And I remember saying, my head really hurts, I'm very depressed, it's affecting my body horribly. Is there honestly no other way? Am I really the victim of like my own reproductive abilities? Because I really don't want to be on this, but equally, what are my choices? And she just turned to me and said, yeah, it sucks, but like, suck it up. The worst is having a baby. Would you rather have these headaches every month and feel very depressed? Or would you rather have a baby? I'm so sorry. This is the reality you have to negotiate. And I was crushed. I couldn't believe it. So I think at the end of the day, if women are more informed about the fact that they can track their cycles, that there are apps for it, that there are many techniques you can use, that you can cross-check that you are sure you're not pregnant, I think then you're allowed to make a more empowered choice. Because taking a pill every single day, all month long, or putting in any type of external device or hormonal supply into your body to trick it into thinking it's not pregnant, to make it a hostile environment for sperm, is like taking a pill every single day to prevent a headache that comes 5 days a month. It's a bit confusing. It's not that intuitive, is it? Yeah. But most importantly, above all, the very father of the pill, Carl Djerassi, has said in so many interviews that the technology for the male pill has been available for many years, but he said it's never going to take off because economically and socially, this is not men's responsibility. It's a business issue. It's a social issue. It is not a technology or science issue. The technology is there. It's just never going to sell because this is women's problem. I hope this is making sense. I realize I took a bit of a detour, but...
Wow, for sure. This is the stuff that it actually, like, I can feel myself sweating when I'm here because, again, I think it's a whole kind of just mess in itself. If we're going to be taking these pills to already alter the hormones that's within us, surely before we do that, we need to understand what is our normal, right? Absolutely. So a lot of girls, they don't. Like when I was in school, I know a lot of my friends, I wasn't one of them, but they were on pills from some of them the age of 14 all the way up through secondary school and into university. And before, what I think now is before they've had even a chance to understand what's going on, how it affects you mentally, they're already kind of altering their genetic, their makeup, right? And the fact that you're saying about the male pill, and this is the one thing that gets me the most, is when you put to the gentleman, yeah, but if there was a male pill, would you? And he'd be like, why would I take a pill with so many side effects? And I'm like, women have been doing this for years. And I think girls especially when I was on it for a year and a half, I think. And that year and a half, looking back, my mental state, I was so ungrounded, verging on depression, and I thought there was something physically wrong with me. And not only that, I had no spark, you know, it was like a complete numbness. And I dread to think how many people are sitting in their houses thinking that they need to go to a doctor for mental health, when it could be something as simple as stop taking the pills and the contraception that you are and see how you feel.
So when I'm listening to you speak, I got goosebumps and shivers because it was exactly the same. And when I went off the pill, in fact, so I started the pill not because I wanted the reproductive safety. It's because I had been diagnosed with endometriosis, and doctors told me I used to get the worst period pains as a teenager, where I would, literally faint from pain. I would pass out. I had to take like injectable painkillers, skip school. I had to be in the doctor every month. It was really a hassle. And they said, well, this has been shown to kind of help regulate the cycle. Maybe it will help you. But as you said, what happened to me is I lost my spark. I lost a bit of my will to live, in the sense that I just didn't really care about anything. I was very indifferent. If things didn't happen, they didn't happen. I had crazy mood swings. I was really not myself. And I brought a lot of trouble to the relationship I was in, because who bore the brunt of like some very, very completely off the cuff mood swings was obviously my boyfriend at the time. A poor guy, bless him. Sorry. But when I finally went off the pill, because I got into yoga, and at one point I was starting to feel very uncomfortable putting the pill into my mouth. My body was just screaming at me internally, even though my mind was saying, take the pill, or else you'll go back to having that horrible life that you did. Until one day I broke down in tears after a yoga session, and I couldn't put the tablet in my mouth. And so I went off it. And that's when I actually had this vivid experience where the life was just in color again. And I realized, oh my goodness, I'm not depressed. I'm medicated.
That's so cool. And that's the scariest thing, okay? And I remember, so I was on it for just, I think, around 2 years. Then I come off it, and then for the debate that we're going to have after this, for the reason of, I'm just going to say it, my partner at the time not liking condoms, I went back on it. And it was then when I went back on it that I really felt just how much effects it had on the body. I was on it maybe even within a week, I started to feel this kind of depression, this slug. I feel like a fog was coming over on me. And that was the point where it was a massive turning point. And this is what we're going to talk about now, is the whole sexual health, the woman's responsibility, but also the guilt of us making them wear protection.
It's complicated. I think it is, because on the one hand, goes without saying, condoms are essential, not just for reproductive health, but as in for unplanned pregnancies, but also for reproductive health, is what I'm trying to say. But when you're in a supposedly, trusting relationship where you can trust both parties to be monogamous and be safe, it's very unfair to turn around and say, well, I prefer it this way. Let me place you through this discomfort. And girls feel like they're in a position where they kind of have to comply, because we're talking about a lifetime's worth of socialization where women are taught to kind of repress their desires. They're taught to be more subservient. They're taught to accommodate much more since being a little girl, right? So boys are kind of encouraged to, be bold and be assertive and go after what they want, and they're encouraged that confidence, and girls are kind of silenced a bit. They're told, don't eat like that makes you ugly. Don't speak so loud, it's not very ladylike. So of course there's going to be an extension to that dynamic in relationships, unless both parties, both men and women in a relationship, turn around and look at their conditioning and say, wow, okay, I've been brought up in this way, and that makes me think I have to go through this for you. Or no, you're right, actually, how could I have thought that this was an acceptable thing to request of you, because we're talking about, you know, mass level socialization of people. It's not an isolated case. So I think sexual education about consent, because this is an aspect of consent. I think people think consent is just yes or no to sex, but it's consent in every aspect of a relationship. It's reevaluating critically sexuality. It's reevaluating menstrual health, cyclical health, sexual contraception. This education is absent, and that is creating problems for people. You know, problems that are emotional and maybe, you know, physical, because now you got a baby, or, you know what I mean?
In the extreme case.
Yeah, in the extreme case, but it's the subtleties as well. We're talking about a spectrum of issues that we could alleviate by just having a conversation.
And I think that is it. It's having, but even when I think now, I'm like, where are these open conversation and communications taking place? And at what age? Like, if I could run the world, I swear, like,
I would love that.
I know, Sarah White running the world. But yeah, I think we all need to be aware of the opposite gender, don't get me wrong, but I think women definitely in this kind of instance, there needs to be a whole upheaval.
I think for both men and women, men have their own issues as well, I think. And for example, if you think about it, the number one thing that can kill men is heart disease, right? Usually by stress and anxiety. And we know the effects of toxic masculinity on repressing emotion. And then Ayurveda, the science of yoga, we talk a lot about how repressing emotion can lead to heart problems. That's just one example of the many issues that men can face. You know, suicide kills so many men. It's one of the lead killers as well of men. What is making these men so unhappy? But equally, what is one of the leading causes for death in women? It's actually men. So we're talking about unraveling toxic traits stemming from toxic masculinity, but that affects men and women. And I think women need that massive upheaval, like you say, but this conversation cannot even begin if men aren't on board to heal themselves as well, so that they can help heal women. It's a beautiful two-way exchange kind of waiting to happen if we're willing to look at the uncomfortable aspects of the situation, because it is very uncomfortable. We don't want to think about these things, right?
I think it's the vulnerability of it as well. And I think everyone, even now, even if I think back to school, it was kind of any kind of sexual questions, not even sexual, just even women's health. It was kind of like, oh my, I can't actually ask that because for one, I'm scared, I'm embarrassed to even talk about it. And that's the stigma I think that we need to get over first.
I agree. And even with things like tracking, I feel, you know, if you read Terry Weschler's books, I say Tori Morrison, Taking Charge of Your Fertility, she discusses that in detail. And I think it's very important when you're looking at your health for just you very privately to work through that trauma. So the cultural trauma of being ashamed of your body. And when you're tracking your cycle, it's great to input it in an app, but you can check that in 3 ways. So one, you can use your temperature. And the other two are a lot more intimate, because we're talking about going up in there and checking what your discharge is, what it looks like. We're talking about checking your cervical positioning. Is it lower? Is it higher? Is it closed? Is it open? And when you start building that relationship with your body, that when you cross-check any of these 3 things, and you'll know immediately whether you're fertile or not, you're very empowered, because you're not dependent on an app anymore. You can look, you know exactly what your body is like any day of the month. And I know this is quite a radical thing to say out loud, but it shouldn't be, right? This is your health at the end of the day. You should do your breast checks to check for cancer. You should check your body to check your fertility. And in fact, this issue is something so widespread that unfortunately a lot of women keep running to the doctor's office thinking they've got an infection down there, when in reality they just don't know that your body is going through cyclical changes in discharge. You just need to understand the language in which your body speaks to you.
I like that. I think that is a good way. Yeah. I think we can wrap it up, I think. Is there any last kind of tips for women understanding themselves, apart from the books and obviously doing their own kind of inner work?
That's a great question. I love journaling because when I journal and compare to where I am in my cycle, I notice patterns. So in my journal entry, I always write the moon, which phase of the moon we're in, and I write which part of my cycle I'm in. And then I cross-check the entries looking back retrospectively, and I notice, oh, this is a pattern. I think that's a great one. And I would actually want to ask you that question. How would you recommend it to women?
You put me on the spot here. Apart from the tracking, I think, yeah, just altogether trying to take away the stigma of it, because I know a lot of people watching this, especially when you say like get up in there, they're going to be like, whoa. I think we need to just start appreciating ourselves as a whole, right? And we have got amazing bodies, we've got these muscles, these organs, and we know so much about this external kind of facade, right? Yet there's a whole world ready for you to kind of explore, a whole new knowing that will empower you even more. It's like the more that you know about yourself, the more you can trust it, the more that you've liberated yourself from needing anything else in the world. And that can go into every kind of aspect that we've been speaking to, whether it's your yoga practice, menstruation, whether it's sexuality. It's just knowing yourself as a whole and not leaving any kind of chapters missed, you know, just because it's a taboo in this society.
I love that. I love how you phrased that.
Thanks. Perfect. Well, I think that's it. Thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you for taking the time to make the space for this conversation.
Of course. Hopefully it will be well received. If you are watching this and you've made it all the way through, hit like, hit the comments. We'll share it on all the different platforms, and hopefully if you share it to any of the younger generation as well, girls who you know might need this kind of information now, especially on lockdown, we'd really appreciate that. So peace and all the love from me.
See you later, guys. Take care.
Ciao.
Bye.